Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Koopa Fantasy. I am of course Koopa Fantasy, and this video is my Week 6 Sit-'em Start-'em picks for the 2012 fantasy football season. You can find my articles if you want to read them instead of listening to my crappy voice online at KoopaFantasy.com. That's KOOPA Fantasy.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Blackie_Mike, or just got Koopa Fantasy. You can probably find me that way as well. Because I'm very active on Twitter. I love answering questions, getting into like little debates, stuff like that. So if you, the easiest way to get a hold of me is definitely on Twitter. Like and subscribe my videos. That's awesome for me, guys. And don't be afraid to comment and rate my blog entries as well. All right, guys, let's get into it. My Week 6 Sit-'em Start-'em picks for the 2012 fantasy football season. All right, at quarterback, we got Christian Ponder. Washington has been one of the best teams in terms of allowing opposing quarterbacks to score points against them. Same with wide receivers, so I am looking for a pretty big game from Christian Ponder. And his 4-1 Vikings, I wouldn't have thought they'd be 4-1 after 5 weeks. I don't think Ponder is really necessarily going to throw over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, and like that, but I think it could go over 250 and 2 touchdowns while adding some great value to his legs, maybe even a rushing touchdown. And then at running backs, Rashard Mendenhall came back from his injury with a great game, 81 yards and a TD. No one really saw that coming. Pretty sure the majority of the fantasy world probably had him on their bench just because of the tough the injury and whatnot. But against the struggling Titans, Week 6, I don't think I'm leaving on the bench in any of the leagues that I own him in. And then Michael Turner for Atlanta against Oakland. Turner's kind of has snubbed his distractors the last few weeks. A lot of people are saying he's going to fall off this year, but he's had a couple of good weeks recently. He's got one of the best matchups he's going to have all season against the Raiders' run defense. The main concern is that the Raiders are coming off a bye week and that they could be fired up to get that win. But the Falcons look like one of the best teams in football right now and should be able to put up lots of points and get the win. And Turner getting his fair share of points in the game as well. And then for wide receivers, Arizona's Andre Roberts versus Buffalo. Roberts was a hot addition off the waiver wire just a few weeks ago when he went off for about 100 yards and 2 TDs, I believe. But he's been fairly silent the last week with only 5 catches and 59 yards, or I think that was all. And then against the Bills defense, he allowed. But against the Bills defense, it's allowed over 1,000 yards in the last 2 games, and that's allowed 45 points or more in 3 different games this season. You got to go with Andre Roberts and hope for a big game there. And then in Seattle, Sidney Rice is taking on New England. Rice is yet to have a big fantasy game yet to have a big game for fantasy owners in 2012. But I'm thinking that could change against New England Patriots and their secondary. We all know what's up with them. They tend to give up lots of yardage. Opposing teams tend to play from behind against New England, so you could see Seattle throwing a bit more than they usually like to in their normal game plan. And whether or not it's Russell or Flint at the helm this week, I think Rice could. Definitely gonna have the opportunities to have himself a big game and finally make himself relevant to fantasy once again. And not finally, sorry, I got 2 more wide receivers. I'm going to skip down one. I'm going to go to Mario Manningham first, because we all saw as Robert Meacham burned his former team for a pair of TDs last week, and now Mario Manningham, now a San Fran 49er, is going to be taking on the New York Giants. And the Giants don't have the greatest defense right now, especially in their secondary, so I think Alex Smith is going to be able to take advantage of that, put up some better yardage totals in the air than he usually does, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Mario Manningham burn his opposing team like Meacham for a score. And then lastly, the final wide receiver, and easily the most sketchy on this list, is Jerome Simpson, because he's dealing with leg injury. I don't want to have the same thing that happened to Ben Tate happen this week, where I put Ben Tate on my start list despite the fact he was questionable because he ended up not playing. So just in case Jerome Simpson isn't playing, and the reason he's on here is because of the great matchup with him and Christian Ponder versus the Washington Redskins and their pass D. Percy Harvin and Kyle Rudolph can't do it all, although you should be starting both those guys for sure, obviously. So look for either Jerome Simpson if he's playing, or Michael Jenkins and Devin Romashodu. I'm not saying any of these guys are going to be studs this week, go off for 100 yards or in TD or something like that. But if you're in deep leagues or you're desperate for a bye week filler, you need a flex, you need that 3rd or 4th wide receiver, look for these guys to at least to get a bit more targets than usual as forced to throw the ball a bit more. They're going to throw the ball a bit more against the Washington secondary. And then an honorable mention in Donald Brown against the New York Jets. I personally have no faith in Brown as a fantasy starter most of the time, if not all the time. I own him in 1 league this year, and I rarely ever have him in my lineup. He's always on the bench. But it's just hard to drop a player with a starting role like his. But this week, I think I might be putting Brown in the lineup against the Jets. The Jets are second last in the NFL. They've allowed 172 rush yards per game to opponents, and Brown should be able to make that to get finally a 100-yard game with his legs, if not at least 100 total yards, and hopefully that TD. And now on to the sit-em list. Joe Flacco versus Dallas. Dallas is one of the best teams in football, not allowing other teams to move the ball in the air. That's largely due to the fact they have an improved secondary, but even more so the fact that they have DeMarcus Ware and a really good pass rush. Joe Flacco is already a QB that tends to force up or cough up the ball, so I would not be surprised if Joe Flacco had a rough game, including a turnover or two. And then Carson Palmer versus Atlanta. Like the Cowboys, Atlanta's defense has not been very giving to opposing QBs. As I pointed out to many people last week, asking me about RG3. So Atlanta's only allowed 5 passing TDs through 5 weeks. That's not a very good odds for Palmer. If you're looking for a 2-3 TD game from him, I'm thinking you might actually get an interception if you're sticking Palmer in. And then for running backs, Frank Gore versus the Giants. I've had Gore and his teammate Kendall Hunter on my stardom list respectively last couple weeks, but that's not the case this week. I would have them both as a sit. I'm not liking them against the Giants, as I think that game is going to be a lot of passing. And Frank Gore's yards per carry average hasn't really been the greatest this year, despite the fact that he's been scoring some TDs. And then Alfred Morris for Washington going against Minnesota. They've had a stellar run D this year, largely why they're 4-1. I think they've only allowed 1 rushing touchdown so far this year, so I'm not looking to get one out of Alfred Morris in week 6. And the last running back, Steven Jackson versus Miami. Miami's only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns to opponents, the Dolphins, and they also have the best team defensively in terms of giving up rushing yards to opponents. I think pretty sure they're at about 62 yards per game rushing to opponents. So if you have Steven Jackson as a starting player this week, you might want to check out your bench, check out your waiver wire, see what else you can grab. On to wide receivers, James Jones versus Houston. James Jones paid off for anyone who used him last week. He had 2 TDs, but I think he takes a week off against the Texans, as Arian Foster is going to be put on the field a lot. Green Bay is going to be I don't know. Well, it's hard to kind of say because I do think Green Bay is going to be in tough against Houston and is going to need to score some points. I just feel as though this is a matchup that does not favor James Jones, as Houston has a very tough defense, and James Jones tends to drop some balls. On to Anquan Bolden. Kind of because the same reason Joe Flacco's on this list. I don't think they're going to have the greatest day throwing the ball, and I think that's going to be a lot of Ray Rice and a lot of tight end action. And my final player on the sit list is more of a beware. The fact that it's Wes Welker. I don't really know if you want to sort of sit this guy, but it is a very worrisome situation going against the Seahawks, who've only allowed 3 passing touchdowns all season. So if you have Wes Welker as a starter and you have some decent to good options behind him, you may want to look somewhere else. But other than that, the guy is obviously a stud and very capable of having a good game despite the terrible matchup. All right, guys, that is all for this video, my week 6 sit-em stardom picks. Hope you guys like the picks. Hopefully they work out for you. Should you choose to listen to me, feel free to comment down below. I'll do my best to get back to you. But to tell you the truth, if you want instant feedback from me or very quick feedback, hit me up on Twitter. That's the easiest way to do it. @Blackie_ @Blackie_ Mike. Hit up my blog, CooperFantasy.com. Like, subscribe, share videos, all that fun stuff that helps me and all the other YouTube people that do this stuff. It helps me out, guys. So I appreciate it. Peace.